A crowd is anybody. An audience is the right people. So my definition of an audience is the right people paying attention. Brings up this question of like, who are the right people? And it depends on your goals and all of that. So we'll break some of that down and, your goals, who the right people are for you, and then how there happens to be this extreme overlap.
Welcome back to the 7 Figure Elite podcast. I am honored today to do something really fun, kind of a real-time case study with a mentor of mine, Nathan Barry. So Nathan and I got to spend some time together pretty recently on his podcast, and it's turned into over 140,000 in revenue in the ensuing 3 months. And as he and I were talking about that, as like, there's some really good lessons here for the audience about some of his big ideas around audience versus crowd, around flywheels, around the idea of going deep with key relationships. And so I'm really honored to have Nathan Barry, CEO, founder of Kit. Nathan, thanks so much for being here. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on. It's good to hang out. You were on my show, now I'm on yours, like full circle.
Absolutely. Yeah. Not quite as fancy of a setup for me as when I got to come to Boise and be part of your world. But yeah, just to give people a quick setup here. So I was on Nathan's show. If you haven't heard it, you got to go listen to it. Released in May, I believe, 2025. So a few months ago as we record this. And some really cool things have happened since that episode went live. Specifically, we have 14 high-ticket clients that have come into our program that have attributed hearing that show as the lead source. So like very real $140,000 of real revenue. A few other things that are starting to emerge that would kind of say these are longer tail sort of effects of this type of opportunity. I was on Alan Dibb's podcast. I'm starting to develop a relationship with him. He and I were talking about some things he's doing in the publishing world, which happens to intersect with some things that Nathan's doing in the publishing world. But he's the author of the one-page marketing plan and is working with James Clear now on some other projects. I have had Pamela Slim on my podcast because she heard me on Nathan's show. I just did a private training 2 weeks ago in Justin Welsh's private community as a result of the exposure from the show. So it's really just starting. And my experience with these things is there's a lot more to come. But one huge signal that to me comes from this is like, this is an audience that is extremely in tune, resonant with the stuff that I teach and trusting of the work that I shared on Nathan's show. And frankly, it's not that big of an audience. At least, I think my episode on YouTube's like short of 2,000 views, yet 6 figures in less than 3 months and all this amazing relationship capital. So all that to say, Nathan, like I love your reflection on that, this idea of audience versus crowd. What do you take of all this?
Yeah. So first, if we think about, usually people talk in terms of revenue per subscriber. That's a common thing that comes about, okay, you have 100,000 subscribers. Hey, if you made $1 per year per subscriber, we got a 6-figure business. $1 per month per subscriber, we've got a 7-figure business, right? And then you hear some stories of like these very small audiences that convert really, really, really well. Like I've got friends, there's someone who works in aircraft sales. Now that's a category. If people are spending money on planes, we're talking maybe $500,000, but probably more like $3 to $5 million. And just everything is expensive. So he's got this email list of 2,500 people, and he makes a lot of money off of that. Like it is a very, very high revenue per subscriber. And so you end up in these wild ranges, and it depends on industry and pricing and so many other things. But what's interesting to me about your appearance on my show is we're not even talking revenue per subscriber, we're talking revenue per view. And so that YouTube video is, call it 2,000 views. And then the audio downloads on that are probably another 2,000 or so. So we're under 5,000 views total and $140,000 in revenue. And so that's why we didn't even go to subscribers first and then on from there. So that's the first thing that stands out to me is that is just really, really high. And I think the reason comes down to this core idea of an audience, not a crowd. And everybody thinks about audience in terms of how many subscribers you have, how many followers, all of this, how many people pay attention to you. And there's sort of this other like metric or dimension to it of like, but how deep is that relationship? And that's the idea that I've been trying to publicize is like, not all views, not all attention is equal. Like me doing TikTok dance videos, which, maybe that'll be a second, third career. I don't know.
I hope so. Yeah.
It's come to a craft and commerce closing party and you might see some of that. That's just not going to have, I could have 1 million views on that and it would not be worth 2,000 views on the right podcast episode. And so I've kind of broken it down of like sort of the difference, right? A crowd is anybody. An audience is the right people. So my definition of an audience is the right people paying attention. And so then that, brings up this question of like, who are the right people? And it depends on your goals and all of that. So we'll break some of that down and, your goals, who the right people are for you, and then how there happens to be this extreme overlap. But then, like in a crowd, like bigger is better. But in an audience, bigger might not be better at all. It might dilute the whole thing. A lot of people talk about, being a creator and or an influencer like is draining and you feel like you're always performing. And that's a signal that you have a crowd. People that I know that have an audience are like, I cannot believe that I get to show up and 1,000 or 10,000 people, like they want to talk about and nerd out on the same things that I do. Like we're friends now, our families go on vacation to get like all of these things, it's like giving you energy. And then there's all kinds of things. Like often in a crowd, people feel jealousy, right? Like, oh, I can't believe that, Dustin has this and I don't, or, that sort of thing. Like, oh, good for him. Whereas like in an audience, they often like feel like they identify with you or they're trying to pursue the thing that you have and they're trying to learn from you. And there's like empathy there.
Yeah. So
And there's often an audience, like there's a level of care about you and your goals and your life and all of that. Where the crowd, it's like, I don't care about you, like entertain me, dance monkey, like do the thing to entertain me. And there's just a few other things like an audience is focused, whereas a crowd is random. And then I think a crowd is like really meaningless and an audience can be really meaningful. It's usually about what value can I deliver. And so those are a few of the different approaches. But I guess to go into your episode, or well, maybe we'll back out a little bit and talk about my show.
yeah, I was gonna say, I think getting, obviously go listen to it. There's lots of people that are way more talented than me that have been featured and even way more views on YouTube. But what I would say is it's a special show. It is, and I'm not saying this just because you're on the other side of the mic. Like it is legit my favorite podcast, at least in the recent year, because of the format, the types of guests, your style. And I think a lot of that nuance actually has a lot to do with why this particular interaction was so effective at kind of magnetizing the people that are in my audience versus in a crowd. But I love if you had to describe to people like what's the Nathan Barry show for, who's it for, kind of what's the style, if people aren't familiar, if they just want to hear in your words kind of the craft that we get to see as a finished product. I'd love to get your idea of how you're trying to, I think, curate an audience versus trying to cater to a crowd.
Yeah. So my goal is to make your favorite creator's favorite podcast. And so in that, I'm very specific about who I'm targeting. I'm targeting professional creators. And so I define that like professional and very successful, because professional might just mean you're earning a full time living, which depending on where you live or your lifestyle might be anywhere from $60,000 to a few $100,000 a year. My like floor for who I'm talking to is $250,000 a year in revenue. Totally thrilled if other people listen, like all that, but I'm not making content for you. That's the cool thing about the internet. Like we're not gatekeeping it. Anyone can listen in, but people will come to me and say, hey, will you make a beginner episode? Like, how do we get the first 1,000 subscribers? And, or how do we make the first 100,000 a year in revenue? And I'm just like, no, never. And it's said with love, but like, I'm very clear about who my audience is. And cause like, it's interesting of like, my audience is such a good fit for you and you're such a good fit for my audience because you're a professional creator earning 7 figures a year. And so the more we stay in this wheelhouse, like the better it is for everybody. And so I make these very deliberate decisions of who to have on, who not to have on. But what I'm looking for is the stories of like, if I go to an event, so like Alan Dibb and I met at Mastermind Talks, which is this community that I've been a part of for, probably 8 years now. And everybody there is quite successful, but like really cares about building relationships and investing in other people. Like it's not transactional at all. And so at that event where I met Alan, there were so many other speakers who were like, I listened to your show, or like my general manager for my business sends me this episode. We were just implementing that. Like that episode was super impactful. And I'm like, oh yeah, what was impactful about it? And then they'll list off 3 things. I'm like, oh, you did actually listen. And like these are the speakers at the event that I'm attending.
Yeah. You actually were like focused on it. Yeah. And I think that speaks to the quality for one. It's kind of like master's level content or PhD level content in some cases, right? This is not beginner content, like you said, on purpose. It's also just, I think your personality kind of transcends it. So even guests that I've heard interviewed in other places where they come across a little unapproachable, kind of bro markety, in your studio, it feels like conversational, open, transparent, vulnerable. I think there's a vibe that comes from just the way that you set this whole process up. I did a whole podcast episode about the flywheel as I observed it being in person in Boise and like the things that you do there. So anyway, I think, yes, your guests are an important piece of this. And I don't want to lose sight of the fact that your style of hosting and the environment that you're creating with this is really important. So if you don't mind sharing just a little bit about like why, and I'm sure part of it's efficiency for you, but like why in studio, why have a dinner the night before with some of the guests? Like what are some of the behind the scenes things that you figured out? Because that's not how you started, right? But like now that you've got a rhythm with this, why is it designed the way it is? And do you think that has an effect on attracting the audience in a deeper way too?
Yeah, I think I wanted to make a show that stood out and I wanted to make sure that was fun for me and that I was proud of. Like the intersection of those things. So like as we've been putting out episodes and they sit at 500 views, 1,000 views, like that's pretty typical. There's an element of like, is this worth it? Because I can allocate time a bunch of different places. So I'm like always thinking, okay, am I doing this in a way that's worth it? And so the kind of the first bar is like, well, am I proud of the episodes that we're putting out? Because I will keep doing it for a very long time, so long as I'm proud of it. And so really doing in studio only was I figured it would help me make something that was more unique. And then it would also just be more fun, like the energy and all of that. I feel like even doing virtual episodes later with someone that I've met in person, I'm like, oh, the relationship is totally different. And then I knew that I could make it stand out much more. And actually, the format of my show, we do two different styles of episodes. I guess kind of three. One is the expert interview, like just sitting down on the other side of the mic. The second one is the coaching episode where someone comes in with a problem. It's usually something like, hey, I'm at 1 million in revenue. How do I scale to 5 or 10? And then we get up on the whiteboard. I say whiteboard, the black pieces of paper.
Yeah, the blackboard with the white markers. Yeah.
Yeah. And we just diagram it. And there's something about being up on the board that I think just changes the whole conversation. And then the third one is the like, teach me. So like maybe an episode that's a good example of this is Dan Martell, where I just said, all right, you've grown to millions of followers. He and I have been friends for, I don't know, 12 years or something. And I've watched him create content all the way along. And then 2.5 years ago, he got serious about it. And then he, went from 10,000 or 20,000 followers to multiple millions, in 2.5 years. And I could tell like he got serious about it. And so it was like, all right, we have a whiteboard. I know you're good at drawing and sharing ideas and all of that. Like, teach me, what did you do? And there's material that he's shared plenty of times before. Like it's in his book, Buy Back Your Time, all of that. But there was something about being at the board and writing that out that just changed the format. And like Dan does, I don't know, that man probably does 10 guest podcasts a month. Like I'm constantly seeing him getting on the plane and be like, now we're in Scottsdale and, California and New York, like just all these podcast episodes. And the clip that we put at the beginning of his episode is he goes, that is the most value added podcast episode I've ever done. And it's after we finished the episode. He's like, no, I mean it. Like, and so I guess going back to those goals, like in person, focused on professionals, expert level, in a format that felt different, like those are the things that make it really exciting for me. Now they create a bunch of constraints or a bunch of problems. So when I started doing this format, it was taking up a huge amount of my time. Like I was spending half a day every week recording episodes because you got to put out a weekly show. So people are flying in or I'm flying to them. We're recording these episodes, and then we're hanging out, we're doing all this. And so like best case, it would take over an entire Tuesday morning to record. The produced version is like 55 minutes of content, And I was like, I can't do this. Like this isn't working. And I was asking people like, hey, will you fly to Boise? And they're like, okay, but your show has like 3,000 subscribers on YouTube.
Yeah. I've checked the YouTube stats. There's 500 to 1,000 views, right? Yeah. So,
The last episode got 700 views. And so then I was like, okay, maybe I can solve all of these problems at once. And so what we did is we said, okay, I'm going to record once a month, 4 times a month. Right. And so I said, we're going to batch recording. We're going to fly everyone in at the same time. So then there's this element of like, oh, I get to hang out with the other guests. I can streamline this whole thing. So I can switch fully from operating kit mode fully into content recording mode and just tell my team, like, you're not going to hear from me. Like, contact Chelsea, my assistant, if you need anything, but like, I'm not going to log into Slack. And then the other guests can record with each other as well because we're here in Kit Studios. As there's 5 studios here. So you can, teach your webinar, record an episode with John Meese since he's in town, like any of those things.
absolutely. Yeah. Take your pick of Taylor Swift themed studios to create more content while you're there. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. So any of those things can happen. And then we also just dial in every part of it. Like Kara, my producer, writes the intro for the episode while the episode is happening. So after we finish the episode, I just sit down and read it off a teleprompter as the guest is sitting.
That was one of the most impressive things I took away because I'm always like, trying to fumble through my own introduction here, even if I post record it. I mean, he has like a world class copywriter who's in the room picking up the vibe. And then she does such a really cool job of capturing that. Where I'm standing as Nathan's reading it, I'm just like, damn, that's good. Like, I want to watch this episode and I just did it, So it's really good.
Yeah, so it's just been this process. I guess the last thing that you mentioned is the dinner. And that's just something, so what we do is usually we record with two guests on Monday afternoon. So people can fly in Monday morning, we're with two on Monday afternoon, and then two on Tuesday morning. And then in between, we do that dinner so everybody can hang out with each other and we can get to know each other, all of that. I often workshop ideas, things that I want to, hey, what should I do next with my Flywheels course? Well, like what feedback do you have for Kit? Any of those things.
Yeah, we had some great conversations about group coaching and the Flywheels course that I'm in and fully endorse over dinner with other people that had great feedback. So I'll just give you the perspective as the recipient of this. Like, it was totally worth 2 days to fly in the day before, go to dinner. My recording happened to be Tuesday and I flew out Tuesday night. Obviously, it turned out to be great. But even if there was no sales as a result, the experience, to be in proximity to Nathan, with Kara, with Haley, in our case, that we had dinner with, and any other guests, like that alone, super cool. Then I'm in Kit Studios. I get that whole experience. Feels like a red carpet sort of production. And then, I'm using that studio time that's available to me. I guess to me, it captures the culture of the creator culture of Kit in a 2-day trip that actually produces a podcast, which is like a really great, it's like a side effect, right? Yeah, you nailed it. And like I said, I did a whole podcast episode sort of breaking down my perspective on the nuanced things. Like, you guys captured a testimonial from me while I'm there. And I'm like, well, of course, I'm on a high coming out of the interview. I love Kit. Everything about Flywheels is awesome. Let me do a really enthusiastic, case study video. And I was already there and it worked out great. And Kara has a really key role in this, and that, by the time you get in studio, it appears to me like you're pretty much queued up, exactly what we're going to talk about. You're obviously really good at what you do in coaching. And I guess going back to my episode specifically, and then we'll move on to like Flywheels. I originally intended my episode to be coaching. So like the topic is, Nathan, help me go from 1 to 3 million, right? In business. And we did do that, but that was like 10 or 15% of the interview. I think, credit back to you as a host, sort of the vibe of this thing was flowing, and you're just like, yeah, teach more, teach more. You asked me some really great questions about your own podcast guesting strategy. And I felt like coming out of that, I'm like, that was way better than I expected, because I was just trying to get coached by Nathan, but he gave me the mic and let me teach. And I'm sure that's a dynamic you have to like manage depending on how the conversation flows. But so it's like, quote unquote, scripted in a way that there's a format that's predestined, but then you're really good, I feel like, letting the episode air the way it needs to, and letting the guest or you have more of the mic time. Yeah, just depending on like what the audience is going to get the most out of. So does that feel fair that it's a dynamic, even though it's kind of like pre-structured?
We try to plan, we do our research in advance. As we sit down before we record the episode for somewhere between 10 minutes up to an hour. And we'll talk about, okay, what is the episode? What value are we hoping to deliver to the audience? Okay, no, that's a little too beginner. Even we'll talk about, we don't always go with this, but like, hey, what would the title and thumbnail of this video be? What's the promise of it? And, we're still early in the audience growth journey, but like you can see that paying off. One thing that I'll call out, this is a little separate from the day-to-day like recording process, but is we talk about the audience versus crowd. Almost every growth technique that people talk about for growing a podcast is good for growing a crowd.
That's really good.
And that's been the hard thing, because people are like, well, these videos got great results, so do the beginner version of that.
Yes, because there's a lot more beginners than there are professionals at the top end.
Yeah, so if you want views, like don't target people who are making $1 million a year.
They're not camping out on YouTube all night, like binging beginner or how-to videos, right? Yeah.
Right. And so our YouTube team, who's fantastic, they're a company called 7X Content, and they do really great work, but we've had to like rein them back in some of that, because they're like, this will drive more views. And I'm like, I totally agree. And it will drive views to the people that I'm not trying to attract. And so that's been this balance. And that's why I've had to set my metric on consistency and pride rather than views, and basically just trust that over time we'll ladder in. Because there's lots of times where like the subscriber count of the show goes up by 50 subscribers in a week on YouTube. Like that was pretty normal. We actually then had like a 2-month period, actually after you came on. So, correlation, causation, like we can't say for sure, but, just hit 50% growth on like went from 8,000.
On the side, I happen to be on the same, a couple weeks as like Dan Martell and some other people with large social followings, but forget that. It was mostly Dustin. Yeah. So
Oh, 100%. Have Dustin on your podcast, your show will grow within 90 days. That's what the data says.
I'm glad you said that. We're going to flag that. That's going to be the new lead video on my homepage. So
I love it. So that's been the thing of like, all right, how do we be, just consistent over time? So if you want to transition and talk about flywheels,
yes, I would love to make sure we get some content on flywheels from you.
yeah, they have kind of usually there's two main goals. Now let me back up. So there's three laws of a flywheel, right? And everyone uses this word, but like I actually want to define it and break it down. And so the three laws are flow. So every step has to go smoothly from one into the next. And most specifically, the final step of the flywheel has to close the loop and come around to the beginning. Second is ease. So you want each rotation to get easier than the previous rotation. And then the third is growth. So each rotation should drive more results, growth, et cetera, than the previous rotation. And if we take the podcast recording process, early on, that was a very scattered process. Like, hey, do you want to come on my show? Yeah, we can do that. We can schedule it at a random time, virtual, in person, whatever. Like everything is bespoke to whatever's happening there. Over time, we started to go to a linear process. And this is kind of like what professionals do, where it's like, all right, we've got our SOPs, all of that.
So it is step by step, but it's not a loop and it doesn't close upon itself to build momentum. Yeah.
Yeah. And it doesn't really follow these other laws that we'll get into. And so that linear process is like, hey, we only record in person. Here's who we're targeting with the show, that kind of thing. And that made it better. We started to have a system for how we recorded it and all of that. But then when we made the batch recording events, that's when it turned into a flywheel. And one thing with a flywheel is you have to be really clear on what the goal is, because you can actually only have one goal for an effective flywheel. And our goal for the podcast is to efficiently produce episodes that we're very proud of. And so it's not really about growth or all of that. Like it's about efficiency and pride. And so I can't just have episodes I'm really proud of if they take 30 hours a week of my time. And then like the exec team is like, hey, would you mind showing up to work at like the company that actually pays?
We got this like $40 million company over here that kind of needs your attention. Yeah. So.
And I can't just optimize for efficiency because then we churn stuff out that I'm not proud of. Right. And so the intersection of those two things really is what designed this process. And so every batch recording event that we finish, Kara and I will sit down and we'll recap it and we'll rate how proud are we of each episode after we finished it, just like on a 1 to 5 scale. How much friction did we feel? What caused the friction? And so there will be little things in there. Like actually the recording intros was a huge point of friction, because what would happen is first we didn't record intros. And then our YouTube team was like, hey, could you give us we need to make like a trailer, like give us more. And we're really trying to find these things and cut and slice and, and so all right, we'll do intros. And so then Kara would write an intro, like the bullet points of it, and put it on her phone. We'd finish recording and then she would give me the phone and I would look at it, kind of memorize that, and then like try to deliver to camera and like bumble through it and get the pronunciation of their name wrong and everything else. And it actually, like, I felt embarrassed because we just did an episode that I was really proud of. And then like I kind of just like screwed that up. And as a creator, I'm supposed to be good at this stuff.
And the person standing in the room in many cases too, your guest too. It's like, oh man. Yeah.
And so then when we added a teleprompter, because now these Elgato teleprompters are $250 and you should like every creator should own at least one.
I bought one literally when I left your studio. I have one now. It's awesome.
Yeah. And so we put that on the close-up shot that's just on me. And so now I read it off. And it was interesting, like reflecting back on the friction. Multiple recording events, tons of friction over intros. And then we fixed that one thing and it flipped. Like the friction that I felt in recording dropped significantly. And it went from like a point of embarrassment to a point of pride, because we could just make the guest, like I felt great. The guests like just got this killer intro and all that. And they were like, wait, how did you, what? And I was like, well, Kara wrote it. And they're like, oh.
It's like a magic trick that you get to witness in person. Yeah.
And then we started to improve the process of like Kara has a custom Claude project that's just about writing intros. And so she's feeding it notes throughout, and she's already fed it our show notes at the beginning, and all of that. And so she's not even spending the whole episode like crafting all of this intro. She's like, no, not that. How about this? Okay, yeah, good to go. And so there's all of these things that, because we treat it like a flywheel that we measure every single time, then we're able to make it so much easier with each rotation. Now, if you go to growth, this flywheel is not primarily about growth, right? That's a secondary. We do still measure it, but our goal is like, hey, if we make stuff we're proud of for the right audience, it will grow. But we do measure that. And so then we do ask, hey, what could we do to drive growth more? And there's things like, we'll brainstorm guest selection, topics, packaging. That's how we started writing intros, was because our video team was like, this will help us so much if you would, with growth, if you would do this thing for us. So we might try other things, like we've been doing related episodes at the end, or, we'll record that little snippet as well as part of the intro. So it's kind of the flywheel approach. We're measuring it every single week, seeing what results are we getting, how proud are we, is the friction reducing, and all that. And now we're rounding off like pretty little things, but even then it's making the process that much sooner. Like a little thing was, hey, did we make sure to collect lunch orders from everybody for the Tuesday afternoon recording? Because we're going to wrap up, and like, let's make sure that lunch is there waiting for us. So when the guests came in the morning, do we hand them the menu for wherever we're ordering lunch that day, and make sure, because it's just the one other little thing to have dialed in.
Yeah. And then I think we don't have to get into any more nuance, but I think an important thing for people to hear there is the three laws of the flywheel, basically flow, ease, and growth. The fact that every individual flywheel should have an individual goal, because you have to know what you're optimizing for. And one flywheel can only be really optimized for one thing. It can have secondary effects. And the other thing I heard you allude to is that a given process or system can actually feed or have multiple flywheels associated with it, right? Like you guys have a growth flywheel associated with podcasting. You have the primary flywheel about efficiently creating content you're proud of. But then, I experience other things there that maybe don't make the scorecard. And the last thing I want to say is you're keeping score. Like, even if it's qualitative, you're like, how easy was this? How proud am I of this? Like, you can still give something a 1 through 5 rating, even if it doesn't have necessarily a hard metric to it. But measuring the flywheel over time is super important, because that's how you optimize. But like, there's this nuanced stuff that maybe just doesn't show up in a flywheel, which is totally fair. But like relationship capital, like having dinner with these people that are in some cases really established creators, maybe in some cases you're getting to know someone for the first time. The fact that you're capturing testimonials, the fact that you're, creating secondary content from the primary, event of having someone come in and do this stuff. Even the peer-to-peer capital that you don't have to be in the room for, but the fact that, like, how can I ever not be an evangelist of Kit because I'm in this room and I met the leaders of Kit, I met these other cool people that are on the podcast. When I hear that podcast, not only the one I'm on, but the one these other people I know now are on, of course I'm going to share that. It's a soft thing, but I think it's something worth talking about, that it is still really important.
Yeah. So like the recording that you came out to, you and John were both on it. You know him super well, obviously. Your community knows him super well. And part of that, like scheduling, you guys are like, well, let's come to the same one, like we're both coming. But there's also, you're walking away with relationships with 2 to 3 other professional creators who are building things on the same scale and ambition that you are. And so there's all of these other little side effects. And then you're going to go listen to their episode, because you're going to be like, I heard the 5 minutes in the hallway of like how it went, but like I want to actually listen to it, which then, like I might have people on the show who maybe they're not like a diehard fan of the show already. Right. But they're like, well, that was good. And I do want to listen to that episode from, the random other woman that, did an episode right after mine. So listen to hers and be like, oh, this is pretty good. Which then, it's this very slow flywheel, but it results in more things of like the community feeling of the people on the show, listen to the show. They know the ins and outs. They know the messaging, the community, they know Kit, like they know each other. They'll cross-reference shows all the time where people will say like, well, in that episode, when you had so-and-so on, you talked about this. And so it's just like the same process spinning over and over again. And then having people back, like something that I want to do even more of is having recurring characters on the show, right? So anytime you want to come back, you're absolutely welcome. Just tell me what you want to teach.
Yes. All right. We got it on tape. This is my actual goal of having you on today. We're not releasing this anywhere. I just wanted to be invited back. Get the next 140 in the bank. No.
But like Jay Singh is coming on the podcast next week. He's been on before, and he's going to like do this deep dive on, like how creators should implement AI. He's doing this huge AI implementation project for Kit as well. And so we'll probably talk about that some. And so anyway, I guess the thing is, as you imagine this flywheel spinning over and over again, it's getting this small group of people as tightly connected as possible. And then we'll see what magic comes from there.
I love that. Yeah, because in reflecting on it too, a lot of the people that end up on your show, whether it's A or B happens first, they're also speakers at Craft and Commerce, right? And or they're attendees of the mastermind that happens around Craft and Commerce. It is a deepening of the highest quality relationships in the kit community. And even something as simple as like it exposed me to the kit studios. So now I want to be going to kit studios. I want to bring other people. I want to host events at maybe the Chicago kit studios, which is closer to me. And so it just pulls me into the community ecosystem because I had to experience that to do the show that I really wanted to do.
And I think that's another good point is the like bringing people all at the same time. Then we're like, hey, record with each other, right? Because that's the thing. But then the other point that you brought up is someone could be listening to this and be like, well, good for Nathan, right? He has Kit Studios, like most people have not dropped tens of thousands of dollars, or in my case, hundreds of thousands of dollars to build out like this level of production studio. But it's like you have Kit Studios as well, right? There's nothing stopping. And we're working on building a New York location, working on building Austin as well. And so there's nothing stopping you from like flying to Chicago once a month and doing your recording event in Chicago and recreating the exact same thing. The only hard thing for you is that, I have a 15-minute drive to the studio. You have a
Take a 4 hour train ride or fly up to Chicago. I'm in the St. Louis area, so it's not that bad.
Yeah. So it's like, but again, like the exact batch recording process, like you could copy paste the entire flywheel and it would work great for you. And I would be thrilled because you'd be putting out all of this content. You'd be bringing people into studios and you'd probably be like, people are like, this is killer. Where'd you learn this? And you're like, oh, I learned from Nathan. You should check out his podcast too.
Absolutely. Well, I love the behind the scenes. I mean, one of the things I think that endears people to you and the culture you've created at Kit is vulnerability, transparency, building in public. Like, and these are all things that we really are doing as part of the show. I think it'll take me about 60 seconds. I think it would be good for me to summarize the guesting side of this flywheel and like, how does this revenue actually get generated? This is of course what we teach in our main program, but I think about this and to use a Nathan term, like a high altitude flywheel. So kind of think of flywheels. There's some that kind of inform the whole strategy of your business, and they go all the way down to super tight, like very specific processes that you can optimize that may be a lower altitude flywheel. One of the things that we do and teach is this idea that, hey, every time you're doing a podcast guesting appearance, it's not just what most people think, it's just like a linear, I get on, some people heard me, they opt in for my email, and I get some clients. That's part of it. But there's really three audiences: the listening audience, the host, and then the other guests that are on this show. And then there's the post-production audience, I'll call it. And so that when I think about a flywheel, very loosely defined, I think of and what happened with me going on Nathan's show: email list, sales, host relationship, guest relationship, content repurposing, and authority. And so when I reflect on that, I don't even know sitting here, but I'm sure we got several hundred email opt-ins as a result of offering a good incentive to your audience to go deeper with podcast guesting. Obviously, we got sales. We've talked mostly about that today in the form of like 140,000 in direct revenue in the first 90 days. I think Nathan and I have a much better relationship. I doubt he's sitting here on my podcast if we hadn't had this time together, and I've got to spend time with him in person at Craft and Commerce, and hope to do a lot more of that sort of thing in the future. The guest list is something I'm just starting to kind of get into, but now, if I run into Dan Martell somewhere, at least I have the credibility to be like, hey, man, I was on Nathan's show. I really loved your interview. And so it kind of opens up the door to cool relationships with cool people. I experienced a lot of that at Craft and Commerce this year because my episode came out a few weeks before Craft and Commerce. I'm walking around. There's this effect of like people squinting at my name tag and be like, I feel like I know you from somewhere. I'm like, oh, I was on Nathan's show, podcast guesting guy. They're like, oh, man, yeah, I love that. Like, and so, there's a lot of people that I felt like I had a kinship with because they were listeners or fellow guests. Content repurposing, I don't do a lot of this, frankly, on my guesting stuff. But this episode I've reused a lot. Like I feature it a lot because I think it's my favorite interview I've ever done. And it's obviously effective. And so we're featuring this and like email signatures. We're sending out newsletters about it. I'm posting on LinkedIn, pulling out clips. Obviously, it was kind of the focus of this interview that we're doing as a byproduct of it. All of those things sort of taken as a whole, and this is my loop closer, loosely defined, my flywheel closer. It builds authority, right? Because I was on Nathan's show, I've got more relationships, bigger email lists, sales, content, and now I have more authority so that when Alan Dibb hears my show, all of a sudden I'm like, yeah, like he invites me on his show. I don't even have to ask. And I've been on some other cool shows already as a result of kind of doing well on Nathan's show and having people notice that. And that's a flywheel, right? Like every time you get on a new podcast, it should flow from one step to another, like we just described. It gets easier because people say yes a lot easier once you've done it a few times, especially as you continue to grow in your authority. And then those opportunities get bigger and bigger because you're able to like ladder up the authority. So that was way more than the 60 seconds I said. But that is how I view the other side of this microphone of being a guest on a really cool show like Nathan's. And I think there's that dual, it's like a win-win-win relationship where I think Nathan won by having me on there in some sense. I definitely won by being on his. And I hope the audience definitely won by the fact that we had a really cool, unique conversation, grew each other's influence and authority in some way, and created really unique content that has never been and will never be replicated. So, any reflections on that, Nathan, before we wrap up and let you get to your day job?
Yeah, I love that because it's a fantastic flywheel. And, I talk about different loop closers and like authority increasing is definitely, a loop closer because just think about as that authority builds, even if it's like a 1% improvement on every outbound email you send or like relationships at a conference or whatever else, right? And so it's absolutely worth investing in. What I'd be most curious about from your side, going back to the audience versus crowd discussion at the beginning, as you teach your students, what would you say to them about podcast selection and pitching in order to find the audience? Because they could spend a whole lot of time getting on a whole lot of podcasts that would not move the needle at all. Because to them, maybe to someone else it's an audience, but to them it's a crowd. And so what would you say on that selection and what would you teach there?
Yeah, I love this question. The answer to this would depend in some way on the level of authority they have, right? The reality is they're not getting on certain shows as their first step because they need to run the play a few times and get the reps in. And
Like any show for the first 5 guest appearances might be just fine. Like literally anything.
exactly. Yeah. Get some reps in. Don't worry too much about who's listening. So I kind of qualify it with that. But once you're at a certain point, you've done, let's say you've had 10 interviews under your belt, you've got the signal figured out on like who is the type of audience that responds well to your work and who do you like to work with. Then you can be very proactive in seeking out those audiences, right? And so we have a whole, deep dive on all this. But I think one key thing would be topic selection. And so the main thing there I would say is whatever the thing you're a bona fide expert in and the thing you coach, teach, and get paid to share with others, don't try to be on a show that directly talks about that. I'm not going to go on Nathan Barry's show and talk about how to build an email marketing company. Like that doesn't make sense. Like he's the expert in that, and he wants to have me on to be a subject matter expert in something that's adjacent to that, but not replicating his expertise. That's probably like cardinal rule number one that people violate all the time. So you actually want to look upstream and downstream of that core problem. So, meaning what are the triggers that cause people to have that problem and what are the results or symptoms that arise when people are experiencing this problem? That's like a really general framework for topic selection. And then the other would be more like size selection. And I'm really big on not worrying too much about how big the podcast is. Like, I was on your show and I was on Pat Flynn's SPI podcast. They both got released within about 2 weeks.
Yeah, they're 2 very different scales of
Yeah, and I don't know all the download numbers, but based on YouTube and like Apple ratings, which is a pretty good surrogate for size, like Nathan's has like 80 ratings, mine has like 40, so I'm not throwing shade. But Pat's has like 3,500. It's a much larger show in its reach. It's also very much catering a beginner audience, and so I got a couple clients from Pat's show. I love Pat Flynn. It was a dream of mine to connect with him in that way. Like, there's lots of reasons I wanted to do that show. But I could have predicted well in advance that being on Nathan's show is actually going to drive way more business results than being on SPI, even though SPI is much larger. I think that's a misnomer. And so, this could be a very long answer, and I'll stop here. But I think picking the right topic and then choosing a show that you believe, usually through the sort of the personality of the host and the types of topics and other guests that they interview, that you feel like you could have resonance to attract an audience, right? And because it's a quality over quantity strategy and it's a quality over quantity platform. Like you're not going to get millions of people to follow you from being on a podcast. I mean, maybe with like Joe Rogan or something, but probably even not then because it's such a crowd. The number of people are going to resonate enough to come actually do something with you is going to be much smaller. So I don't know if that quite answers your question, Nathan, but
Oh, it completely does. Yeah, I think that's great. And just being deliberate about that, getting the early reps under the belt, like 5 to 10 episodes, you're just trying to learn how to be a good guest, and then be targeted, reach out to a bunch of people. I would even like call your shot and say, like, you can email someone and say, hey, I'm not ready to come on your show yet. Just know I'm a huge fan. And a year from now, 18 months, like, you're going to get an email from me and it's going to be a full pitch of the value that I'm going to deliver because I'm going to tell the story of what I've done between now and then. And hope you're well. We'll talk soon. Like that kind of thing. Like, you can totally do that sort of thing and just play this like long game over time. And I think that's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, there's a lot of strategies to sort of, I know you talk a lot about like the ladders of wealth. There's like ladders of relationship in the way that I view marketing and sort of this relationship based world. And I think it's great to have a dream 100 and a dream 5 and a dream 1. And like, who do you ultimately want to be a guest on their show or have have on your show if you're a podcaster? You should have that aspirational identity or I target, and you can very deliberately build up to it and set that intention. I love what you said because it's like that's not only setting an intention in your own mind, but it's setting an intention in this person's mind that you want to interact with. And then, there's lots of things you can do to kind of build up to that. Nathan may or may not recall, but the first time I met him in person was 2.5 years ago at Craft and Commerce 2024. I got invited into this like mastermind room. I went up, shook his hand, and I said, "Hey, will you be a guest on my podcast?" And he said, "Maybe." It's happening now, but it took 2.5 years. And you've heard about some of the stuff that happened in between. And that is how life works and how relationships work. But I effectively did what you said. I set an intention for something that's now coming to fruition. And it's way better than it ever could have been then because we've got a better relationship and you've evolved in some of the stuff that you talk about. And it's a super tight fit for the stuff that I care about with building an audience as an example. So, all right. Well, I know we've went long, Nathan. I super appreciate your time. Super gracious of you to spend so much time here. Any final thoughts or the pivotal call to action moment? And where should people go if they do want to go deeper on some of these topics?
Yeah. So, final thoughts. I don't know. I think we covered it pretty well in the episode. I love building flywheels. So, anytime someone wants to talk about that, I've got a lot of material on both flywheels and audience versus crowd. So, if you just search my name and flywheels or my name and then audience shortcut, you'll come across 2 essays there that go into a lot of detail. It's kind of what I do is every couple of years, I like try to take everything that I've learned and put it into 4,000 words with some illustrations. And then hopefully that helps out. And then this fall, I'm launching another cohort of my Creator Flywheels community, which has been like my passion project over the last few years to just like refine all this curriculum. And then to see so many people take like good businesses and turn them into great businesses through flywheels is just a dream come true for me.
Yeah, it's amazing. I'm grateful that you do both these things that could be viewed as side projects. I know they're part of a high altitude flywheel that actually feeds Kit as well, your primary business. But as a real time endorsement, as Nathan and I are recording this on a Tuesday midday, I'm leaving as soon as we're done recording to drive to Nashville. I'm hosting a 3-day mastermind retreat. The required reading, and I'm not making this up, for everyone that attends this retreat are the 2 essays he just mentioned. So the Creator Flywheels essay from Nathan Barry and the audience versus crowd, or it's called the audience shortcut by Nathan Barry. So if you look up Nathan Barry essays or look up those 2 keywords, that's required reading to come into this retreat because the whole theme of our retreat is simplicity scales. And how do we build really simplified, scalable businesses led by creators who love what they do? And I think flywheels plus focusing on audience instead of crowd is like the magic. So that, and then I'm a proud first cohort member of Nathan's Flywheel course and Creator Flywheels course. It's a group coaching program. Highly, highly endorse it. If you've ever heard me talk on this or other people's shows about flywheels, I know everything about what I know from Nathan Barry. So I got to give credit where it's due. And I'll continue to spread this gospel because I feel like this is like one of the most key concepts that all creators, but also all people should be incorporating into their life. And so thank you, Nathan, for all the direct impact on me. And you can kind of hear the real-time ripple effect and the people that I get to influence over in my world. So thank you for creating these essays and sharing the stuff that comes out of your brain.
Sounds good. Yeah. Well, thanks for spreading them further and thanks for having me on. It's been a ton of fun.
Yes, sir. All right. Well, thanks for everything. I will talk to you soon, man.